Hello, and welcome to our May webinar on medical device risk management, looking especially at the criticality of medical device risk management for patient and product safety. My name is Yevan Chichian, and I'm a senior consultant here at Brandwood CKC. Regulatory bodies have emphasized the importance of risk management under ISO 4971 in the development of medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. In this webinar, I will explore how risk management is critical to the regulatory frameworks and provide an overview of the fundamental principles and key standards. In addition, I will explore some best practices for implementing risk management activities within your organization, and I will also include post-market considerations. For those of you who are not familiar with Brandwood CKC, we are a regulatory consulting firm headquartered in Sydney, Australia, with offices in various countries. We are a premier regulatory, quality systems, and commercialization consultancy in Australia, serving local and international health science innovators for more than 20 years. Brandwood CKC combines our complementary technical strengths and diversity with a shared commercial focus and global market view across all areas of therapeutics and diagnostics, both in medicines and devices. A bit about me. I am a senior consultant and team lead here at Brandwood CKC. I bring over 20 years experience in the medical device field, with most of that time in the regulatory and quality field, primarily working with active devices, including medical device software. I have supported businesses with regulatory submissions, regulatory strategies, and through their product development and commercialization. My expertise also extends to manufacturing and quality management systems. The agenda for today's webinar will start by looking at risk management context that is within the organization and in the regulatory world. I will identify key risk management requirements and the role of standards. I will then provide an overview of ISO 4971, the standard for risk management for medical devices. I will touch upon some key risk concepts and best practices, and we'll conclude with some key takeaways. So let's start by taking a brief look at the regulatory context. Risk management is essential for identifying and managing product risks and can impact various business areas, such as patient and user safety, regulatory requirements, product liability and legal, and business risks such as reputation, impact of recalls, supply management. These also overlap with other business risk requirements such as OH&S, legal, security, finance, etc. But the focus today in the regulatory context is patient and user safety. Therefore, it is crucial to implement a risk management framework across the whole organization. All global pre-market regulatory approvals require manufacturers to apply a risk-based approach at all stages of the product lifecycle. Regulators require a risk management framework to be established within the manufacturer's organization, from product conception to obsolescence. The first and foremost in the framework is the establishment of the risk management processes. These are the internal procedures and workflows that marries the risk management requirements to the business processes. They identify the internal requirements, when, who, and how the activity must be conducted through the various processes. Because not all countries require a quality management system for medical device manufacturers, a certified quality management system is not required for showing compliance to the regulations. However, a quality management system is extremely helpful in managing risks properly. Because of this, and because most medical device manufacturers do employ a quality management system, the framework that we'll discuss in this webinar is constructed so that it will be easily incorporated in the quality management system that a manufacturer has or will establish. During product development, the key activities include risk management planning, identifying hazards, evaluating and mitigating risks, conducting risk-benefit analyses, and finally, review and reporting of the final status. We will cover these in more detail later in the webinar. Once the product is ready for release to market, the pre-market regulatory registrations, 510Ks, CE marking conformity assessments, can be conducted, which will required that all activities are completed and a risk management file is established. The product can be released and then begins the ongoing monitoring while the product is in the field. During the post-market surveillance phase, feedback from the field, such as complaints, issues, adverse events, recalls, etc., are assessed for the impact to risk. An impact and risk assessment should be performed for all post-market events to determine if any new risks are identified and whether any mitigations are required, which then would require feeding back into product development. Let's now look at the risk management requirements. I have provided a sample of the key regulatory requirements related to risk management that can be found in Australia, EU, and US. Shown are excerpts from the various regulations. Both the Australian and EU regulations include specific risk requirements. In Australia, it is found in the essential principles, including the Therapeutic Goods Medical Device Regulations 2002. In the EU, it is found in the General Safety and Performance Requirements, included in Annex 1 in both the MDR and IVDR. Though the FDA is not explicit or detailed in the regulations, they have included risk analysis in their QMS regulations and some discussions in their preamble to the final rule of the QS regs. Though we will cover some of the concepts in more detail later in the webinar, I just wanted to highlight a few key requirements here. The regulations cover both the design and how they are produced, that is manufacturing. They cover the safety of the patient and other users. They cover the use of the device and ensure the associated risks are acceptable when weighed against the intended benefit. The GSPR requires to establish and maintain a risk management system, including a risk management plan. Continuing, both the Australian and EU regulations also include requirements for identifying hazards and associated risks, evaluating those risks, eliminating or reducing the risks as far as possible during the design, production, and post-market phases. They also include acknowledging the state of the art when considering solutions for conforming to the safety principles, such as identifying existing potential hazards with similar devices. The options for reducing risks include introducing through safe design and manufacture, adding adequate protection measures, or informing the user of any residual risks. The FDA uses guidance documents to explain their thinking or approach to various regulatory requirements. Two key guidance documents that inform us on FDA's thinking on risk management is listed here. They include design control guidance for medical device manufacturers and applying human factors and usability engineering to medical devices. They are clear that FDA expects a risk management framework similar to that of other jurisdictions. The requirements for risk management also align with the EP and GSPR requirements. The question may be asked, how do you show compliance to the Australian essential principles or European general safety and performance requirements? The primary method is by applying accepted international standards. Shown are examples of several Australian essential principles here, EP 1, 2, 12, 13, and 14. For each EP, I have listed the standards that can show compliance to the requirements. Of course, these will vary for each product, but here are examples shown for a typical active device incorporating software. Risk management explicitly covers several requirements, for example, EP 1 and 2, and indirectly for requirements such as EP 12. That is, risk is integrated with many of the standards that can be applied to show compliance to the requirements. Let's now explore further the standards in more detail. The primary accepted or harmonized standard internationally for risk management for medical devices is ISO 49071. It specifies the terminology, principles, and processes for managing the risks associated with medical devices, primarily to the patient, but also to the operator, other persons, other equipment, and the environment. It includes processes to identify hazards associated with medical device, to estimate and evaluate the risks associated with these hazards, to control these risks, and monitor the effectiveness of the control. Importantly, it is applicable to all stages of the life cycle of a medical device. The current edition of the ISO 49701 standard is 2019. There were a number of changes from the 2007 edition, which we'll cover in the next slide. This standard is referenced in most medical device safety standards, such as ISC 601-1, ISC 60304, ISC 62366-1, ISO 10993-1. These standards can be used to mitigate known risks. Also, ISO 14485 references the standard for inclusion in the manufacturer's quality management system processes. Though the standard does not provide details on specific risk analysis techniques, there are a number of additional standards that can be referenced for assistance for conducting the risk evaluation and analysis, such as ISC 61025 for fault tree analysis. This is a top-down exploration of contributing factors for hazard events. ISC 60812 for failure mode and effects analysis, also known as FMEA, which provides a bottom-up determination of effects of function, component, or subsystem failure. And ISC 61882 for hazard and operability studies, which determines how procedural and design deviations can occur and the effect of such deviations. These are just a few examples. So let's spend some time looking at an overview of the ISO 49701 standard. Firstly, what are the key changes introduced in the 2019 edition compared to the previous 2007 edition? It provides clarification of definitions, such as benefit, reasonably foreseen misuse, state of the art. More attention is given to the concepts and benefits of medical devices and not just being safe. Requirements related to data gathering on similar devices. More focus on risk management planning and post-production activities. Also, several guidance annexes were removed and incorporated in a new technical report, ISO TR 24971, which provides detailed guidance on how to use the standard most effectively. It clarifies the requirements of the standard and contains recommendations and practical examples on how to achieve compliance with those requirements. It follows the same structure and the same clause numbering as ISO 48971 to facilitate its use. The general requirements of the ISO 48971 standard include the following key areas, which will be described at a high level here. Management responsibilities. What roles within the organization will be responsible and have authority for conducting the various risk management activities? This is typically defined within the organization's QMS, typically in the risk management SOP or plan. It includes those overall responsible for the process as assigned by top management. Qualification or competency must be defined for those involved in the risk management processes. For example, you would expect engineers to contribute to the hazard or risk analysis, or medical or clinical team to help define potential harm. The standard requires that manufacturers establish a risk management plan. This is a living document that must be maintained for the life of the product. It describes the scope of the risk management activities, the responsibilities and authorities of those involved, the criteria for risk acceptability, the production and post-production information to be collected and reviewed for the medical device, and all the risk management activities that are carried out during the entire product life. The risk analysis process is where the core of the activities are conducted, which include defining the intended use, identifying hazards, evaluating and mitigating identified risks. These will be explained in further detail in the following slides. The standard requires that the final results of the risk management process be reviewed to ensure that the risk management plan has been appropriately executed, that the overall residual risk is acceptable, and that the appropriate methods are in place to collect and review relevant production and post-production information. The risk management review is performed after implementation and verification of all risk control measures, but prior to commercial release of the medical device. There's a risk management report, provides a summary of this review and is included in the risk management file. Finally, the manufacturer needs to establish a system to actively collect and review production and post-production information about the medical device that could be related to safety, which is fed back to earlier phases of the risk management process to maintain the safety of the medical device. All the documents must be compiled or referenced in a risk management file for each product. This diagram describes the typical workflow of the ISO 497 risk management activities, which we'll briefly look at each one. I should highlight that it is important to understand the terminologies here, specifically the difference between risk assessment, which includes risk analysis and risk evaluation, and risk management, which covers the whole process. Also, the risk management plan is shown, which is a document that defines the whole process for a particular device. Keep in mind that the risk management process is an iterative one. That is, experience of the device used in the field will allow manufacturers to learn, iterate changes, and develop further knowledge of the risks. So the first core activity is the risk analysis. The risk analysis process consists of defining the intended use of the medical device and reasonably foreseeable misuse, identifying the characteristics of the medical device that are related to safety, identifying the hazard and hazardous situations associated with the medical device, estimating the risks for each hazardous situation. These typically include likelihood of occurrence of harm and the consequences of that harm, that is severity. This will result in a risk profile. The severity and likelihood of occurrence are based on criteria or rankings defined by the manufacturer. Here's an example of a severity matrix based on a 5-rating scale. The ratings range from negligible to catastrophic to define the severity of harm to the patient or user. Here's an example of a likelihood matrix based on 6-rating scale. The ratings range from incredible to frequent, which defines the likelihood of an event occurring per device per year. Several approaches are commonly employed to estimate likelihood, such as use of historical design and development data, prediction of probabilities using analytical or simulation techniques, use of experimental data, reliability estimates, production, post-production information, or use of expert judgment. ISO 497 requires that the manufacturer perform risk estimate of each risk. For each identified hazardous situation, the manufacturer shall decide, using the criteria defined in the risk management plan, if risk reduction is required. Various methods can be used to estimate risk. Those methods should be examined. For example, the circumstances in which a hazard is present, the sequence of events leading to a hazardous situation, the probability of a hazardous situation occurring, the probability of a hazardous situation leading to harm, the nature of the harm that could result. Risk should be expressed in terms that facilitate decision-making on risk acceptability and the need for risk control. For example, using severity and probability scales. In order to analyze risk, these should be analyzed separately. It is important to point out that the expectation of regulators is that all risks are individually addressed. The matrix presented may be best to understand the suitability of risks, but each risk needs to be individually addressed. Several options exist to reduce risks associated with medical device. This can be used alone or in combination. The manufacturer can explore different options to reduce the risk to acceptable levels. The order of priority is important here. When deciding on the risk control measures that are appropriate for reducing the risks to an acceptable level, the following risk control options should be applied in the priority order listed. Firstly, introducing safety by design, by eliminating a particular hazard, or by reducing the probability of occurrence of the harm, or by reducing the severity of the harm. Adding protective measures, including preventing the occurrence of a hazardous situation using, for example, a guard, preventing a hazardous situation from leading to harm, using, for example, alarms in a medical device itself or in the manufacturing process, adding information for safety within the product labeling. I just want to briefly discuss risk acceptability. ISO 14971 does not mandate a policy for risk acceptability. The manufacturer must define a policy for risk control, such as reducing risk as low as reasonably practicable, reducing risk as low as reasonably achievable, or reducing risk as far as possible without adversely affecting the benefit-risk ratio. It is important to note that only AFAP does not allow economic considerations for mitigating risks. That is, risks must be reduced as far as possible without economic or business considerations. Both the TGA, EP, and EU GSP are clear that risk must be reduced as far as possible. Ensure that this is the risk acceptability criteria you include in your processes if you want to market to these jurisdictions. Residual risks are evaluated by the same method and with the same criteria for risk acceptability as the initial risks. The residual risk is either acceptable or unacceptable. When unacceptable, further risk control options should be investigated. If further risk control is not possible, a benefit risk analysis may be performed. Residual risk evaluation can be repeated through the life cycle of the medical device, when the production and post-production information indicate that either the risk or its acceptability could have changed. ISO 14971 allows the manufacturer to perform a benefit risk analysis for those risks that are not judged acceptable using the criteria established in the risk management plan and for which further risk control is not practicable. The benefit risk analysis is used to determine if the residual risk is outweighed by the expected benefits of the intended use of the medical device. Benefit risk analysis cannot be used to weigh residual risks against business advantages or economic advantages, such as for business decision-making. This is crucial. The final phases in the risk management processes are the production and post-production phases. A risk assessment should be conducted for the following: production activities, which include identifying issues or changes in the manufacturing process or supplier; post-production activities, which include customer feedback, such as complaints, etc.; issues identified during servicing, installation, or maintenance; adverse and reportable events; issues with similar products; or application of new standards. And now that we have discussed the risk management framework, I thought we should briefly discuss key risk concepts. Firstly, let's look at some definitions. This slide provides an illustration of a common hazard, fire, and the related risk concepts. Starting at what is a hazard? It is potential source of harm, in this example, the fire. The circumstance in which people, property, or the environment are exposed to one or more hazard is the hazardous situation. Harm is a physical injury or damage to health or people, or damage to property or the environment due to the hazard. Risk is the combination of the probability of occurrence of the harm and the severity of that harm. And finally, residual risk is the risk remaining after risk control measures have been taken. Now, to help understand the relationship between the definitions, this diagram illustrates how the manufacturer is to compile a list of known and foreseeable hazards associated with the medical device in both normal and fault conditions, to then consider the foreseeable sequence of events that can produce hazardous situations and harm. According to definitions, a hazard cannot result in harm until such time as a sequence of events or other lead to a hazardous situation. The risk can then be assessed by estimating both severity and probability or likelihood of occurrence of harm that could result. The probability of occurrence of harm can be expressed as a combination of separate probabilities, P1, P2, or as a single probability, P. A decomposition to P1 and P2 is not mandatory, but may be helpful. To help better understand the concepts, this table lists some examples from Annex C of ISO 14971. The first example is an electrode hazard. The hazard here is electromagnetic energy, high voltage, for example. Foreseeable sequence of events is the electric cable unintentionally plugged into power line receptacle. The hazardous situation is the line voltage appears on electrodes, and the harm are serious burns or heart fibrillation. The second example is for an infusion pump, where the functionality introduces a hazard, such as no delivery. There are two foreseeable sequence of events. Firstly, electrostatically charged patient touches infusion pump. The electrostatic discharge causes pump and pump alarms to fail. The hazardous situation occurs where the failure to deliver insulin to the patient with elevated blood glucose level and no warning is given. The harm to the patient is minor organ damage or decreased consciousness. The last example is due to a measurement hazard, such as incorrect information is provided. Again, two sequence of events. Firstly, measurement error occurs. Secondly, no detection by user. The hazard situation is when there's an incorrect information reported to the clinician, leading to misdiagnosis and or lack of proper therapy. And the harm is a progression of disease or serious injury. Ultimately, when we consider overall safety, we want to ensure that the device and its use is free from any unacceptable risk. Where there is residual risk, the benefits must outweigh the risk. The manufacturer must define the criteria for acceptable residual risks and document them in the risk management file in the risk-benefit analysis. A direct comparison of benefit and risk is complicated and should take the following into account: characterization of the disease or condition of the intended patient, the uncertainty of data, initially a literature search for the hazards, and the medical device being considered can provide some insights into the balance between benefit and risk. Production and post-production information for similar medical devices that are already available on the market, the generally acknowledged state of the art, a comparison of the benefit of the medical device under development with the benefits of the similar medical device available on the market, a comparison of the residual risks of the medical device under development with the residual risks of similar medical devices available on the market. An example of a benefit and risk analysis is when burns can occur where the return electrode of a high-frequency surgery device is improperly attached to the patient. Although conformance to the relevant product standard minimizes the probability of such burns, they can still occur. Nevertheless, the benefit of using a high-frequency surgery device outweighs the residual risk of burns. A very important distinction to be made is understanding the difference between risk management and risk analysis, for example, FMEA. Risk management involves planning, identifying hazards, hazardous situations, harms, evaluating risks through risk analysis, and putting in place controls to mitigate. It also involves determining residual risks, risk-benefit analysis, reviewing and reporting. After product is developed and released, risks need to be assessed during production and post-market monitoring phases. Whereas risk analysis only occurs within the overall risk management framework and is not sufficient alone to cover the requirements for risk management. Lastly, I want to provide some best practices when conducting risk management activities. Illustrated in this slide is a typical risk management process. I have now included how the activities may align with the design control processes of ISO 13485. Initially, during the design inputs phase, the process starts with defining the intended use, its characteristics, use cases, etc. The risk management plan is also established and the hazard analysis is conducted. The hazard analysis may include inputs from state-of-the-art, similar device data, or the list of typical hazards from Table C in ISO 4971. During the detailed design and design output phase, the risk analysis is conducted based on the identified hazards, and the required mitigations are fed into the various subsystems or system requirements. It is recommended for complex devices to break down the risk analysis to engineering subsystems such as electrical, mechanical, or software, as typically different engineering teams would be responsible for each subsystem, and different approaches may be more suited. For example, fault tree analysis may be more suited for electrical subsystems, and design FMEA more suited for software. The mitigation should then be implemented in the design or product. The mitigation are then verified during the design VMV phases and should be traceable. The risk management report would then be completed prior to release, including the residual risks and any required risk-benefit analysis. Finally, production risks would be identified during design transfer, but recommended to start much earlier, say during the design phase, as the manufacturing processes are being designed. Once the product is released, the post-production activities can commence. Here are also some helpful best practices. Firstly, ensure the following documentation is in your risk management file: the risk management plan, the risk analyses, which may be multiple documents, risk management report, which is commonly presented to regulators, the risk management file, which can be an index to reference all the corresponding documents for each product or family of products. Next, break down risk analysis into modules for complex systems. Also, use simple criteria for severity and occurrence rankings. Formative usability evaluations may be a good source to identify unknown or quantifying risks. It is important. You may not know risks exist until you allow the end user to use the product. Ensure also risks are evaluated and mitigated as far as possible. So finally, some key takeaways and conclusion. Firstly, risk management is an essential component of medical device development. It is required for regulatory compliance. Ensure you apply recognized standards such as ISO 49071 and integrate it into your QMS, especially the design controls. Ensure you understand the key concepts of hazard, hazardous situation, harm, risk, residual risk, etc. Risk analysis, for example, FMEA does not equal risk management. It is important to understand that distinction. Ensure all risks are individually addressed and reduced as far as possible for Europe and Australia. Formative usability evaluations may be a good source to identify unknown or quantifying risks. Use of standards to mitigate known hazards. Ensure documentation complies with ISO 49071. And finally, risk management is applicable to all stages of the life cycle of a medical device. Q&A. Thank you for all those who have sent in questions. I have covered some throughout my presentation today. However, to complete today's webinar and with the limited time, I want to respond to just 3 questions sent in. Question 1. For software as a medical device, risk management and cybersecurity risk management will be 2 different aspects. That is probability in medical device and exploitability in cybersecurity. Do we need to maintain 2 risk management documents, or shall we club them into 1? Good question. Either option is acceptable and depends on the complexity of the software and the ranking categories. It is possible to split and maintain medical device and cybersecurity analysis separately, as you may decide to assign different probability ranking structure for each. You can have a single risk management plan and report, but multiple assessments. Separating these might also be beneficial, as the requirements and the activities for cybersecurity might require more frequent updates or reviews. Some find it simpler to combine and base it on the same probability ranking structure only. That when assessing the various hazards, medical device and security, you will apply a different probability at that time. Remember also, there may be overlaps of security risks and other risks. For example, database risks may include operating system failure and security risks. And maintaining 2 separate assessments may be an unnecessary burden. Question 2, how many risk documents are expected? Risk plan, FMEA, production FMEA, list of harms, hazard table, etc. Where does it end? A common question, actually. There are no specific requirements on the number of documents, nor the structure of the documentation. ISO 497 does not require to have a risk, so it does require to have a risk management plan and a risk management report. Then remains the hazard analysis, risk analysis, etc., which can be a single document or multiple documents. The structure and the number of documents is at the discretion of the manufacturer. Some integrate the hazard analysis within the plan, while others have a separate document. The contents of the documents can vary due to the complexity of the device. That is, if the device has a software and electrical subsystem, then it makes logical sense to split the requirements into these subsystems. But your plan and report can cover the overall system. Question 3. What is the interplay between product and production process risk management? Best practice examples, please. Well, product risk analysis focuses on the use and design of the device, while production focuses on the manufacturing and production processes. Production risk analysis attempts to identify steps in the processes that may introduce potential hazards, risks within the device, such that if the device is released to the market with the manufacturing defects, what are the potential risks? It is crucial to conduct both product and production risk analysis early in the design process, specifically during the design prototyping phases and assessing for design for manufacturability, which could identify early production issues and risks. This would require engaging the manufacturing and production team early in the process. Typically, these are documented separately as one focuses on product design and the other on the processes. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for questions. There are many ways to keep in touch with Brandwood CKC. Please do visit our website, where you will find potential information on risk management previously published in our blog and webinar pages. Alternatively, please do get in touch if you have any additional questions or if we can be further assistance. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found this presentation informative.